Hello, this is Dr. Jean, dear future people. Today we're going to talk about organic thinking and about time. And first, let's bind together these two ideas by saying that there is a relationship between them, and that is that organic thinking is timeless. Now, this by no means that organic thinking is immutable, that it's permanent, that it's invariable and does not change. What we are saying is that organic thinking is not independent of time, but indifferent to time. And to understand that better, we need to define time, and we are going to do so gradually as the lecture progresses. Organic thinking is not only timeless, but it has no form or shape and is pure momentum. So basically what I'm saying here is that organic thinking is not only indifferent to time, but it's also indifferent to space. Okay? So organic thinking is alive and it creates its own dimensions. So it forms a reality actively, proactively, and creatively. When momentum is lost, when energy dissipates, then organicity is lost. Then forms, institutions, customs, rites, magic formulae, and organizations and equations and special systems will come into being. In other words, form predominates over content, over essence. Okay? So let's look at some pictures. So this is organic thinking, and you might be thinking that okay, well, maybe organic thinking is nothing else but imagination run wild. No. The difference is that organic thinking is organized so that it has discipline and consistency in it. Okay? It's just that it's a complex discipline, it's a complex system, it's a complex matrix. Okay? So formal thinking is always simple. Okay? So you have this crown, jewelry, these nice equations, these holy relics, and of course walls. Okay, so formal thinking is always simple. Okay, it's multi-dimensional. So organic thinking has a lot of creativity and originality. It also has a lot of imagination, but it's by no means wild. It's very well organized. Organize not like this, organize not like this, because these things are too simple. Okay, they require very little thinking. This requires a lot of thinking. Okay, so it has a lot of work worth. So of course we are simplifying things here to make the contrast sharper so that you are able to distinguish the two kinds of thinking a little bit more. But notice that these things are not separate. They are just at different positions on a spectrum. Okay? So organic thinking is more like this and formal thinking is more like that, but they are basically the same. They are just slightly different in weights, in priorities, and in the basic approach of how they approach things. So organic thinking it belongs to a creative thinker, okay, who sees things as something to be formed, something to be developed. Okay, they generally apply to small communities. Okay, so Creative thinking is much easier in small communities. Uh, they may involve informal friendships, okay, where friendship is not form, but friendship is content. It has a deep meaning, but not a regulated form. Uh, Organic thinking requires a unique personality. Usually, it's amateurish, and inspiration and enthusiasm are very important attributes to organic thinking. Whereas formal thinking is business minded, okay? Realists take things as they perceive things are, okay? So they take existing elements and then build up those elements in a very simple fashion. Usually they involve large organizations, and there is a reason for that. Large organizations are based on very simple ideas, okay? A regulated partnership and regulated partnerships, formal representation, professionalism, opportunity, career. So opportunity, career advancement, self promotion. These things are aspects that a user uses. Okay, somebody who wants to use the world as if the world was a pile of assets that you have to use and exploit. Okay, so that's formal thinking for you. And so to demonstrate that, okay, this is a small community with creative thinking, with local uniqueness, okay, and this was what comes out of this when things are more formal, more hierarchical, more fixed, okay, things are simpler, okay. You may think that they are more complex because more people are involved, but yet, no, more people are involved at the price of regulating them more so that they have a more narrow perspective because they have all kinds of traffic signs that they all have to obey so that they can be in an organization like this, okay? So this is formality, this is content, okay? This is again form, this is content. Okay, this is actual creative work. So now, we should think about organic thinking as a flow, okay? A flow of water, okay, like a river, okay? It overwhelms barriers. Not only going over barriers, okay, but seeping through, dilutes pollutions and poisons and barriers, okay? Organic thinking transcends confrontation, okay. Organic thinking is not confrontational, okay. The water goes right through, okay, not just over, not just destroying things. Highly mobile, variable, creates new methods, okay, not method driven like formal thinking is. And it's uncountable because mathematics, which fixes things, okay, just doesn't apply. Organic thinking is too variable, too much changing in essence, too much complex, so that mathematics cannot model it sufficiently. Now, formal thinking hits barriers head on, must use direct tools, okay, and fixed tools that are already there, because formal thinking is not creative enough to produce radically new tools. It prefers confrontation, it is static, homogeneous, copies others, and readily measurable. Okay? So the exploiter, the user, okay, is always limited. Okay? Because it uses fixed forms, fixed tools. Whereas an organic thinker, okay, has very little limitations. The only limitation is the energy that is released by organization, okay, because that energy too is not infinite, okay. obviously, the larger the community, the more the energy. So organicity. Um, Now imagine that your mind, as an individual mind, okay, is like a soul seed and is in a little pit, isolated from the next person's mind, okay, next person's soul, and so there is a distance, there is a separation between the two, and you both will then generate roots. Okay, so the roots grow down the soil, okay, like this, okay, and you maintain your separation. Now, this is true in a low energy state from a materialistic point of view. Yeah, there is physical separation between one seed and the next. But now, well, first of all, the roots will sooner or later intermingle, or if they don't intermingle, then there's going to be a functional system between the soil and the roots, which is going to create an organic system down here. But more importantly now, the soul seed is going to radiate energy. You see, this is energy right here, okay? And energy expands, okay? And this radiation is gonna intermingle, okay? So that in a high energy state, and not necessarily from a physical, chemical point of view, okay? The radiation of spiritual energy will be united. So the separation of soul seeds, okay, can be defined only in a low energy state. As soon as there is radiation of energy, the radiation is going to be a synthesis, okay, of the individual parts. And the individual parts are going to maintain their uniqueness, but yet they are not going to be separate anymore, okay? So they unite in a higher form of spiritual energy, okay? And this higher form of spiritual energy is not some outside thing, okay? It emanates also from them, okay? So that therefore the separation, the isolation, the loneliness in a high energy state will lose its meaning, right? So soul seed, complexity and order, timeless and spaceless. It's indifferent to time. It's indifferent to space. As these are dimensions that describe influence-free mathematical space, mathematical time, mathematical space-time. It's like a cadaver awaiting autopsy devoid of life. But real space and time is organic. You see? So space and time, as someone from a materialistic point of view, someone who is minimalistic, who is willing to ignore all the influences which makes this part of space-time different from that part of space-time, not only in one or two or three aspects, but in an infinite number of aspects, okay? Only for somebody like that, space-time is mechanical, okay? Space-time is devoid of complexity, okay? And so if you look at soul seeds like that, then you will see physical bodies. You are going to see brains, or you are going to see hearts, or whatever you attribute the soul to, okay? But if you look at a high energy state with this spiritual radiation, okay, of not some special person, but of everyone and everything, okay, then you are going to see the complexity, and time and space will change meaning. And the usual meaning of space and time, well, to that, organic thinking is going to be indifferent because they are on a separate plane. So organicity, no rigid hierarchy of importance, no uniform units as replaceable parts due to change and local uniqueness. Change and local uniqueness is going to make a rigid hierarchy impossible. Okay? So you cannot fix space-time unless you are willing to ignore its organic complexity. And so you cannot fix thinking into standard thinking, into uniform thinking, unless you are able to completely block out the organic complexity that is behind thinking and all the possibilities that thinking has. So organicity means that organic thinking is able to be aware of the fact that reality encompasses all potentiality, and actuality is just an incidental manifestation of reality. Why? Because all combinations are possible, okay? And if time and space are infinite, there's a very good chance that what is not now will be in the future or was in the past. So that what you happen to detect, okay, and it depends on you, is your actuality, right? And what you are able to detect largely depends on your detection capability. So the facts, the truths, the knowledge that you have depends on your detection capability. But that may be something entirely different for another kind of thinker, okay? So it's a momentary manifestation. It's incidental manifestation of an infinite reality, okay? And so for an organic thinker, what is there, what actually is there, is an infinitely small part of reality, which encompasses all other potentialities which will manifest, okay? So if your time is infinite, okay, what does it matter if this actuality happens now and that actuality will happen 5 seconds or 5 years later, okay? Obviously, the larger your perspective, the more you're going to see this. So now, let's talk about time. So let's see that something goes, okay, from point A to point B variant, okay? And so there are all kinds of local influences, okay? So you don't have a straight line like this, okay? But you have little straight lines because you think like that. You need straight lines, okay? Because time is straight line, okay? So you have these little straight lines, okay? So local influence here changes the direction a little and then changes again, changes again, changes again. So these are local influences. So you expect, based on your local influences, from something to arrive from here to here, okay? But in actuality, okay, that's not the path that something is going to take, but this. Now, if you are not able to detect this part, then you are going to project things back. And you're going to say, oh, this route, okay, was probably in the past like this, okay? So that you think that this should be like this, so that this should be like this. And why? Because you failed to detect that there was this influence here, making this goes not like this, like you expected, but like this, okay? So you projected things back according to your knowledge, okay, that it was likely that. what are we saying with this picture? We are saying with this picture is that when you make a projection, you can very easily make an error if you are not able to detect a particular influence. Okay? You think that things started here, whereas because of a local influence, things actually started out here, and they didn't go this way like they would have without this unseen influence, but actually they went that way. Okay? So, the conclusion we are drawing from this figure is that if you are not able to detect an important influence, then you are gonna make a wrong assumption of how things happened without that influence, which you were not able to detect. And your projection was this, whereas the actual starting point was this. Now, in space, distance may make influence appear minimal, difficult to detect. So, the further away this particular influence is from you, that you were not able to detect, okay, the more likely that you are not able to detect it, and even if you do, you may not see the connection between that faraway influence and what is happening actually around you, okay? But influence may be indirect, okay? So this is what they call the butterfly effect, okay? That maybe that what really happened here is that you were not able to detect this influence, but yet you were able to detect something very far away, okay? And that was mediated by unknown things, and that affected this particular thing right here, okay? So then, since you see that faraway fact, okay, but you don't bind that faraway fact with the things that are actually happening to you, then you think that that effect is independent of what's happening to you, okay? And then you will start forming confused ideas like randomness and chance, because you don't make the connection of this influenced this, okay? And so you think that this is independent of this, and this just changes according to some rules that you don't know. So you see these things as random. Why? Because you don't see how these things are actually dependent on other things, okay? So what I'm saying here is that your perspective will change how you see connections between things, okay? So independence may be proportional to the ability to identify mediators. If you fail to identify mediators, then you're more likely to believe in things like randomness and chance. So interdependence in space and time is sometimes called causation. But with causation also, okay, it depends on you what you find, conforming to the idea of causation, because you may think that this is a cause of this, and you fail to understand that yes, this is a cause of this, because there is an interaction between the two, but you don't see the mediators, or you don't see the confounders, okay? You don't see the whole matrix, okay? The multidimensional matrix. And you see a mechanical connection between this, and you cause that, and you call that causation. All right? So causation is really an oversimplification, and how much you simplify depends on you. So now, independent objects and events, okay, derive from actuality, and actuality is determined by, first of all, your detection capability, second of all, fixed rules that you make up as a projection of your little knowledge, okay? But really, both actuality and causation are artifacts of what you are able to detect out of the complexity of reality. If the entire complexity of interactions could be considered with fine detecting capability and sufficient depth, then interdependence, interliving of all things, will just destroy the idea of separation of units. Events, facts, truths, okay? Because you don't see separate entities like events, like well circumscribed events or facts or truths, okay? And these are very good for deductive purposes and orientation. But you go beyond that and you say that, okay, depending on what I'm interested in and what I'm able to detect, I detected one part of actuality, okay, that I identify as an event, okay, or as an outcome, or as a fact. It depends on my setup. So then, if the timeline miscontinues, then the present is an artifice of detection, an imaginary point for reference. So what is presence? Is that a duration? Or is that an instant, which is separate in time from time itself? How far this point goes, how big the unit is dependent on your detection capability, your point resolution, and consensus. So, you see the problem? Not only that, we are saying that time, which is really the average rate of change, not only that time depends on you, of how many changes you are able to see and how independent you think those changes are, but also what your point of reference is. Because if time is continuous, okay, then you are able and willing to pick up points in time, like events or special happenings, okay, according to how you are looking at time. So what is presence? This moment, this microsecond, this nanosecond? What is presence? It depends on your perception, okay, of how little points you are able to discriminate. And those points are also imaginary. So again, time is a flow. You cannot stop time and say, this is a separate point, which I call present. Right? So really, present and future and past, they are continuous. Right? So there is no such thing as present. At least not objectively. Okay? So you have to have a consensus among observers of how you perceive things, how I perceive things. And the consensus comes out of that regarding such things as present or point discrimination. But that is not an objective thing. Objective for us, okay? Because it is based on our consensus. But for somebody else, it's entirely different. Okay? So, let's think for a minute that time is really linear, okay, like this. And in an influence-free, empty virtual space-time, it may be thought like that, okay? That you have an imaginary point A, you have an imaginary point B, okay, and you go from here to here, and then along with your movement, time also passes like that. Okay, from a point A to point B, unidirectionally and mechanically. Okay, but this movement, okay, is constant only in an influence-free space. Okay, and again, the big error. Okay, movement and change are not synonymous. So here we oversimplified change, okay, as movement. But even if you do that, you will see that speed will be constant only if you have an influence-free, that is virtual space. Okay? And only in such an hypothetical space would be your time, okay, which is a measure of change, will be constant. Okay, but since you have local influences, okay, everywhere, okay, your direction is gonna change, and your speed is gonna change. So you might have an average speed, but that average speed is an abstraction, and that brings you back to a virtual space-time. Okay, because you measure your average speed, okay, for this period, and then you average them out, okay? But there is no this period, there is no this period, there is no this period, okay? It's just your approximation according to your detection capability, okay? How big a change, variation you can actually detect and perceive, it depends on that. This, a linear constant speed or a linear constant time, is an abstraction. It's an oversimplification. Okay? It's not relevant to reality. Well, it's relevant to reality in terms of didactics. Okay? It's very useful in didactics. Time is perceived as an average state of change. But an average state of change of what? Of what you can detect as change, okay? And you may or may not simplify change as movement, because change may not be movement, okay? So your average state of change is going to be dependent of what kind of change you actually perceive, of what you average, okay? So let's make an example. Let's say that something gradually turns from black to white. That's a change, okay? And then something grows, like a plant grows. That's a change. And you measure 5 or 10 things, okay? And you average them out, and then you say, this is going to be the average rate of change. And your time perception will be based on this average state of change. But you detected as change this much out of this much. So what you were able to or willing to investigate will change your perception of what the average change is. Right? So time may be modeled in a different way. Okay? So you're going to say that, okay, this change is like this change is like this, and this change is like this, okay? And out of these things, you make an average rate and an average direction, and you call that time. So then you are going to have time as a flux of many different things, and you average them out. And there is also another possibility, and that is oscillation. Okay, what you, depending on what you're able to detect and what you're not able to detect, something that you perceive like this may actually be more like this. But you are not able to detect this must change, so you believe that this actually is like that. So you model it as a straight line, something that changes, but you fail to detect that change. Okay? So a more refined observation may see an underlying pattern that is different from your pattern. Because if I am more refined, I will see change where you fail to detect change. And you lost a unique pattern, which I am able to detect. Why? Because I'm more refined. My investigation is more refined than your investigation was. So a non-generalized process-oriented time for that observation specifically is then modeled as following a cyclical pattern. So this is more like a cyclical pattern, and this is more like a mechanical, unchanged rate of change. So what I am saying is that what you base your time on, what kind of changes you are able to detect, or how refined you are to see these changes, okay, are all dependent on you and your instruments and your interests, okay? So time may be objective based on consensus. So you and I, we are similar. We have similar detection capability, and so therefore we both are likely to pick up this type of change and not that type of change. And so for us, time is fairly uniform. I see it roughly the same as you see it. And so we make a consensus and we say, okay, time is going to be like this. But somebody much more different than us may see this entirely differently. Okay? So time as average rate of change versus time patterns. Okay? Separate uniform points moving on an imaginary straight trajectory versus local change changing differently, and therefore modeled as a local system. State function changing into a different local system state function. So what I'm saying is that if you are very refined, and if you are able to see many different things interdependent, interliving, really influencing each other, then the more you do that, the more you see that averaging out direction and rate of change, okay, will be very highly artificial, and you're just not going to be satisfied with that. Okay, so what you're going to see is, let's say that you are able to detect this type of change and this type of change and this and this and this and this and this and that. Okay, so you're not going to make an average in terms of an average vector. Okay, which you say, well, this characterizes all these different changes. Okay, as an average, and I'm going to call this time. Okay. But I'm going to say, well, these kind of changes are so different in both direction and rate, okay, that I'm just not going to average them out, okay, but plot these things separately. And I'm going to say that from this state of affairs, okay, I got this state of affairs. And my time, okay, is going to be more like a matrix, okay? So I'm considering a lot of things and don't average them out. Okay, so I don't have a mean time, which I'm going to abstract and say that is time, period, okay? So, of course, for didactic purposes, for beginners, it's very good didactic tool, but you're just not going to be satisfied if you think about it a little bit more deeply. Now, what about a time period? Like a historical time period, for example, okay? You, on the basis of your perception of importance, on the basis of your priorities, On the basis of your approach, you pick out one change out of history that you are interested in, and from that particular point of view, okay, well, I detected this at this particular time point, and I detected the end of this at this particular time point. So between this and this, there is a time period. But again, that depends on you. So this started here, okay? Why did it start here? Because I was able to detect it here, okay? And then I projected something back in the past, saying that, oh, it wasn't there before. But if you do that, you fail to understand the interdependence of what you detected here and what was before. So you have artificially separated points and observer-dependent interpretation of patterns so that you have a historical time period. So, summary. Linear time is useful for modeling absolute, artificial, empty, influence-free space-time and isolated processes with simplified interpretation of patterns, and that is for observations limited to few potential influencing factors. So a low-dimensional matrix, okay? So linear time, absolute time, is very useful if you consider very little things, few things, okay? And you think about things as separate, okay? You average them out, and there you go. There is a straight line, a vector. But if you are more refined, and if you think more deeply, this just doesn't hold up, okay? And you then go one, plane higher, and you're going to say that time is really a flux, okay? And averaging out the rate of change of this process and that process and that process and that process, okay? Or model change as mechanical movement, okay? It's just not going to be a good enough model for you, okay? So how you think about your time will reflect of your needs, what you are willing to accept as a good enough description of something. Well, linearity of time is very crude, okay? If you are a little bit more understanding of the deep complex relationships, interdependence of things, okay, then you will see that linearity of time will not be a useful model for you anymore. So time is a tool. It's a tool of understanding and communication, okay, which can be refined by robustness, the capacity to consider more potential influencing factors and assess and interpret complex patterns without oversimplification. Averaging out the rate of change is oversimplification, okay? And you may not be satisfied with this degree of oversimplification. Oversimplification, separate uniform points with different speeds, giving rise to the idea of average rate of change, giving rise to the idea of absolute time with a linear pattern, okay? And I didn't even mention that you mix up change and movement. The two things are different because changes are not necessarily modeled by movement, okay? Movement is one particular type of change. Only in a mechanical world would you equate change and movement, but the world may not be mechanical, okay? Because it's not material, and even a material world may not be mechanical, okay? So you forgot all your prejudices, okay, that made you think in terms of linear time in the first place, okay? So basically, I'm trying to make you understand these assumptions that you made unconsciously, okay? Make you realize that your idea of a linear space-time, a mechanical, materialistic reality, is based on prejudices, okay, that you are not even aware of. And if you forget those prejudices, then the deeper you go, the more you will see that complex patterns are going to emerge. And linearity is not is becoming a less acceptable model to describe those complex patterns. And if you add variability and non-separateness and a large number of potential influences, then time becomes less and less like a vector, okay? And time becomes more and more a flux of unique directions, of unique complex changes, okay, with a large amount of variability, but yet time is going to be continuous. And then we go back to our original premise, okay, which our premise was that things are not uniform and separate, but things are continuous yet unique. And time is also unique, but it's continuous. So there is no separate time points that are uniform, rather than there is a flux of unique patterns that are continuous and completely interdependent. So that's how we think about time. And then the questions of physics and mathematics of what is time become unnecessary and irrelevant, okay? Because we defined time as the average rate of change of oversimplified processes that we are willing or able to consider, okay? And the deeper we go, the more we see the complex patterns, and more time becomes like a flux rather than a straight line with a direction, which is called a vector, okay? And so the next time we're gonna talk about something entirely different. So we should stop here now, and thank you for your attention.